Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined by Tom Woods for another episode of the Pixar Retrospective. And this week we are talking about Coco, released in 2017, directed by Unkrich and Adrian Molina. And this is the first time we've had Tom on for an episode of the Pixar Retrospective. How are we doing tonight, Tom?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, all good. I've actually just been unpacking boxes today from a move, so yeah, I need a good distraction. Actually, Coco is a fantastic way to distract myself from moving in.
Excellent. I mean, this goes back quite a while. That I think it would have been like last summer, October time. I reached out and I was like, any interest in Pixar? That's kind of how it's gone for people curious behind the scenes. And you were like Coco, and I was like, okay, I'm with you. And I know you've been moving, and I'm very happy I've had you on. I've got very lucky with people's schedules recently. I've had a lot of things on at home, so I've had the benefit of pre-recording weeks in advance for a few other ones. That worked out well. I'll maybe talk about what's going on at home in this. And we're pre-recording it the day before the video goes up, which makes it a bit funner. So we're really like currently here rather than me pretending what's going on in 6 weeks' time on a Tuesday that I've got no idea about. So at least it's pretty fresh. But before we continue, before we ask the people to comment their thoughts on Coco, Pixar, and everything else, Tom, with it being the first time I've had you on this series, I want to ask you your background or early memories with Pixar, which I'm very curious by, and I have been for a lot of different people.
Okay, to my first, obviously, I'm a child of the 90s, so obviously my first run-in with Pixar films was Toy Story and Toy Story 2, and all the golden age of Pixar films in air quotes, because it's banger after banger up until, I don't know, like Cars 2.
Yeah,
and the less said the better, I think, on that one. Until very recently, I kind of went from Toy Story all the way up to Inside Out, which was up there as my favorite Pixar film of all time. And I think, well, we'll probably say it in this, but a spoiler, it might have been knocked off that perch. I mean, Pixar for me is very, very much a staple of growing up, of sort of my interest in animation, or I'm sure everyone has an interest in animation, but my love for sort of animated films, I think them and Studio Ghibli have a lot of things in common. A lot of themes run through the same films. It's Studio Ghibli films have a lot of kids as their main characters, and a lot of innocence, a lot of coming of age stuff. And Pixar is very much the same, and it's very reminiscent of that, but it's told in a more conventional style than say Ghibli stuff. Pixar, the first film I think of when anyone says Pixar is obviously going to be Toy Story. And I think the first one is the best one.
Okay.
My personal favorite one. I mean, 2. It's like my opinion of the Terminator film, of Terminator 1 and 2. I prefer the Terminator to Terminator 2, but T2 is a much better film. Toy Story 2 is a much better film, but I just have a thing for the OGs.
That's fair. I mean, it's been fascinating. I don't know how many different guests we've had on now, right? And there are 2 camps. And not everyone's been the same age that's come on this, right? But without sounding old, kids that were born in like 2001, 2002 who had on, there's his Cars. Everyone, I mean, you're only a couple of years older than me. Everyone that's not those 2 has given the same sort of speech, where it's like, we got to grow up with this, with Bugs Life or Toy Story 2 or Toy Story. It's like that early run. because I think we were the right age. And then obviously older people were like, there was this film called Toy Story everyone was talking about because technology and this. It was like, it's kind of wild. And not that I'm going to have any children on this show, but I was like, I wonder how a 10, 15-year-old picks Pixar now. Like, is it the ones we grew up with? Or is it a Coco, which I think Coco and Inside Out, in a really polite way, feel like the last... I don't want to say the last two big original ones, because A, there's a great original film in the cinema now. I think with Pixar, there's almost a pre-COVID timeline now, where I think what happened during COVID, Disney getting everything on streaming, has had a very different effect on bringing those audiences back several years later.
Yeah, I mean the thing you're talking about is how would a kid rank it? That's sort of born after that sort of, in air quotes, golden era. I think it, probably largely remained the same, because all the stories are quite, not to overused phrase, but timeless. They do, there's very little in the way of old tech in some of them, and they are just sort of universal stories that can be enjoyed in any age. So I think if people watch, younger kids watch them, they largely remain the same. I know some modern stuff would be preferred, and actually, a side note, the best Cars film is the third Cars film.
Yes. Right. So we did that last week, right? And I can say this because I was dreading rewatching the Cars films. So I've seen each of them once and once only, and never intended on a second. And Cars 1 on a rewatch, I was like, you know what, it's fine. It's fine. I get why kids that with that age at that point clicks, that's their thing. I get that. Cars 2, an abomination. I got spy hard on for that. The saddest thing is there's a great spy film in Cars 2, but very appropriately said the logic of the oil in the cars and all the actual... Basically, there's an adult spy story in there that if you took it out of Pixar, wrote a film around it, you could probably put it as a James Bond film. Where they got everything wrong is A, it's Pixar, B, it's Cars, C, Mate is the main character. And it's like, because you can't really explain the nuances of electric cars and fuel cars to children. Whereas, like, an adult spy perspective, it was there. And Cars 3, I really liked. And I was like, and like, not just because I'm into like F1 and stuff, and my favorite driver is now one of the older ones, but it was like, this is a good racing film. Like, there's a good story, there's a good handover, and I was like, Cars 3 surprised me, and it had that trailer that everyone still talks about. And I'm a bit softer on Cars. Cars 2, absolutely not. I do like Michael Caine in it, but I've got nothing more to give than that. And what's his name? Jesus from the bowling film, Big Lebowski. Jesus playing an Italian F1 car. I liked that because he just dialed up the Italian stereotypes to 300, and I thought that's great. That'll do. But Coco, it's the first time we get to speak about this on the channel. I didn't even know if there was an original review of Coco on the channel. There probably was. I'll tell you my awkward behind-the-scenes story of watching this for the first time shortly. Not as bad as Inside Out. But the IMDb plot synopsis for this film is: aspiring musician Miguel, confronted with his family's ancestral ban on music, enters the land of the dead to find his great-great-grandfather, a legendary singer. Memories of Coco. So I'll jump in first. Watching this recently was the second ever time I've seen the film. The first time, it had come out on Blu-ray, and I distinctly remember watching it with both my sisters and my mum and dad. The five of us haven't watched a film together in years. This was probably one of the last times, just in terms of everyone moving out and whatnot. But it was sort of done hysterically because my oldest sister had already seen the film, and she'd asked everyone to watch the film, which she never ever does or did. And she left the lounge just before Remember Me, the end, because she was crying so much because she'd already seen it. So my experience watching that, because everyone was sort of mocking the other sibling for crying, I sort of got to quietly get away with just doing this in the lounge, I remember. And I really enjoyed it. And I've got a soft spot for the film. and I think it's a great Pixar original film. That's like my first memory, and I think it's had that reputation. But coming into this series, watching everything sort of chronologically, and again having a somewhat good experience with Cars 3, I was quite excited for Coco. I'd been to the Pixar event recently in London, where it's all photo ops. There was the Mama Coco, there was the Land of the Dead. It was really cool what they did the Coco stuff. But I had to brace myself for the second screening of this because the week in which, if anyone really cares about behind the scenes, which they probably don't, I've been very quiet on YouTube recently, and there's been a lot of family stuff, but good family stuff going on. That's the key. My oldest sister's had her first baby. I think I'm allowed to say that on the stream because no one knows who we are. And she's a little girl. So obviously I do a lot of dog sitting for them, which is why I wasn't really home and stuff. Anyway, 5 days after baby is born is my time to watch Coco. And I just cried for like half the film. It's really embarrassing. And I've had this really strange paternal maturity over the last 6 months where I won't get too deep, but it was like knowing there's a niece or nephew, and obviously now it's a niece, coming into the family is obviously a huge ordeal. And then seeing a film that's family driven, and it's about not legacy in that sort of shitty sports movie. It's my legacy. Like it's about family history, the legacy of a family, and those memories you leave behind people. The jokingly first time the sister watched it and had cried and ran out of the room, so no one could see her cry again, sort of made it sort of sadder and funnier at the same time because now she's a mother. And it was a very cathartic experience. Like I watched it on a Sunday morning, and I just spent half the morning crying. I think I ended up having to go and get McDonald's breakfast to recover because I watched it very early. But yeah. But I'll tell you this: this is very high up on my list for when we get to the end of the series. I think now I'm allowed to say. But I want to know your history with Coco.
Oh blimey! Yeah, so my history is probably not as intense.
No, intense is the word. Mine's very intense, and it's recency bias.
So, I actually missed Coco when it came out. So I only came to it in the last couple of years. So me and my partner were sort of had a Pixar binge and Pixar and Disney binge like every night. We'd watch one Pixar or one Disney film from the back catalogue, and that was in our old place. But that was the first time I'd watched it, so I had no sort of knowledge of what it was about, and going in blind was actually really cathartic. It was no shame to admit that it's a tearjerker in the right way. I thought it was. I finished watching it and I said that is the best Pixar film I've seen. That is top of my list of favorite Pixar films, and it beat Inside Out, which I also bawled my eyes out at multiple points. I just think the visual. I love it. It is, yeah, and it's only gotten better with it. So I also finished my second watch actually probably 5 hours ago. 5 hours before recording this, and the same again. Just I sort of stopped when it finished. I was like, that was incredible.
I think it's in this really unique state where it has the reputation. I think because it's still relatively new, right, in the context of it's within the last decade. I wanted to compare it to Up, not in terms of like stories are completely different, but they're both films deal with the concept of death, with grief and life, without making this too heavy. But I was sat there like, why isn't Coco really spoken about in that way? And I've had this sort of not epiphany in recent weeks as we've got further into the show. We're reaching more modern films. What you mentioned about Cars 2, right? The golden age up to Cars 2, and I'm with you. The first 11 episodes of the series is just unbelievable, banger after banger, like next level. the 3/4 of studios in the world would wish any of those films was their best ever film, and this one studio put them all out. I think if Coco comes out, the exact same film comes out in 2010, it's on a higher pedestal. And I think Inside Out took the reign of that. This is the big film after all of those. And because this is, I guess, very close kind of to Inside Out in terms of release dates, like 2.5 years away, it's understandable as to why Inside Out spoke about a little bit more. And I guess, which isn't a good thing, I'm going to say, now there's a Coco 2 in production. When that sequel comes out, that's going to obviously be a big part of the whole Disney thing. Now, me personally, no, I do not want a Coco 2. I don't think there is any story to tell with a second Coco film, especially given the great epilogue of the first one. And you'd have to do a different story in a different time. And they wouldn't, there's no need to do that either. Like, not to be horrible, you'd have to cut to like Miguel being Mama Coco's age or something to justify a sequel at this point. And but then it ended up being the same film as what we've just had.
I was gonna sort of jump in and go the point made about Up and the comparison between Up and this, and both sort of dealing with death. I mean, Up is surprisingly a more adult film than it is a kid's film, because the main character is an old man, and it is for adults to, come to terms with their finite amount of time, their mortality, and portrayed through the eyes of its main character. Whereas this is very much, from a kid's perspective, dealing with death and the loss of familial figures, and if who's going to remember them when they're gone. I think the comparisons are justified and well made, and they're two completely different. But I mean, Up, I kind of think isn't as good as its first 5 minutes.
Agreed. I think Up suffers, and Neil spoke about it in the video. That first sort of 5-10 minutes is on like the most incredible high of highs for Pixar, understandably so. And I think where Up goes wrong is once you get to Venezuela. I'm laughing because it just reminded me of a Venezuela thing on the news with we recorded that around the time of everything going on there. So YouTube put a flag on our video because we mentioned the word Venezuela in our tags. Yep, that happens, YouTube folks. But Up forces a narrative with a villain, with an antagonist. It forces all that through, and it never needed it. But at the same time, it's ultimately a kid's film, but was clearly meant and designed for adults. And I think at that point in time, because Pixar was formulaic, not in a criticism, but it was formulaic because that was how animated films were. I think Coco, without jumping too far, does a phenomenal job deciding to have an antagonist and bringing in more of that story across a 2-hour period. There's been a few Pixar films since Up, Inside Out was the first one. There wasn't a villain of the film. And they kind of took their time to, we didn't need to do a villain in this. And I think if Up could have done that, it'd still be a wildly different film. But I think because of Up's reputation, it's kind of in this bubble of you're not allowed to criticize it. But I think when you look at Pixar as a whole, it doesn't compare as a film compared to a lot of others. And I just think how Coco really hit me on the second viewing of bringing in all of those concepts together with an engaging story that appeals to both, I'd say, adults and kids. Very specifically dealing with the Latino background. And if we talk some behind the scenes, which is wild, and we sort of specified before we went live, the original concept of this film came to Unkrich around the time of, I can never pronounce his name, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but around the time of Toy Story 3 releasing, he had an idea. And his idea was a story about an American boy finding out he had a Latino background. And we've sort of laughed and joked. I've made comments about how that sort of film would be done today in 2025 politics. Thank goodness that Pixar didn't run with that and that idea would turn into Coco, because I didn't know what to expect from. I mean, I'll be totally transparent. I didn't know anything about the behind the scenes of this film until doing this project. Hadn't seen any featurettes, hadn't read much on it. I just assumed in a very assumptuous way that there was going to be a Latino director, like what Pixar have done in recent years, where someone pitches this great idea. It would have been somebody from a background, especially focusing on Day of the Dead, and they wanted to tell the story of music within this. The fact it didn't begin as that's kind of fascinating in a terrible way of what the film was. But what Pixar would do is take this concept, rework it, and the key is into, I believe, an authentic story. They wanted to obviously focus on Day of the Dead. Now, I'm going to talk about Spectre ever so briefly. This would have been in production the same time. There's no one where they copied Spectre, vice versa. But a great time for Day of the Dead when Coco and Spectre came out 2 years apart, I would say. But what Pixar did do, which really threw me with this, they created a cultural consultant group. And you can only imagine the screams of the Gammons and the Maggers today if they heard the phrase cultural consultant group. And what was more interesting was it had people of different backgrounds within the Latino backgrounds, but their jobs. You had businessmen, you had playwrights, you had environments of different people to bring their concept of this. And that eventually becomes the film Coco. And a huge part of this, of course, is Unkrich going from being director to co-director, as they also bring up, I almost said Alfred Molina for the second time today, Adrian Molina. Very different. That'd be a very different co-director. Adrian Molina becomes a co-director with his heritage. And I just think, right, they got everything right. And they got it right at the right time, because I don't want to turn into the 2025 political talk, 2026 political talk. If any of that stuff happened today, you'd have the usual suspects screaming woke, screaming this, screaming that. And this film isn't trying to be political. It's just trying to respect and tell the story of a different culture in a studio that has told stories of monsters and toys and fish, and are now telling the stories of animals and other stuff. But people want to get political about, again, that studio that does films about fish in the ocean. So your thoughts on a little bit of those behind the scenes? Like, did you know a lot at all, or are you in the same boat as me? It was quite blank.
No, I was reading your notes for it for the first time. I was like, what is that? That can't be true. I mean, obviously they plan these things so far in advance, or generate these ideas so far in advance. But I don't see how that original film would have worked at all. It's kind of like when, piss a lot of Americans off here. When an American says, I'm 1/33 Irish because my ancestors emigrated when they were, to the New World. It's like, come on, really? I genuinely don't understand how that film would have worked. And the fact that cultural consultancy group was formed, because the whole thing is about accuracy, right? You're trying to accurately portray this Latino culture. And I will put my hands up and admit I have no skin in that game. I'm not, I'm English. I'm a white boy. But even I think, and even I have to admit that in order for us to tell, or for us to get a grasp on different cultures, they need to have people in those of those different cultures represented in the films that come out, even if it is sort of like westernized, I guess a little bit for the idiot white people. But
I agree.
It is all about authenticity, and I'm glad that is the direction they chose to go in, because ultimately we got, in my opinion, the best Pixar film to date from it, and it is a pivot and a pivot towards that I think really helped, really worked.
Agreed. And I think at the time, Pixar are doing so many sequels, and I know everyone picks on the 2010s, and there's been a fair chunk of original films, but Inside Out and Coco are sort of the big two. And I think this is where I personally struggle with, I don't say modern day Pixar. I don't mind sequels. When the studio's third of a film is a sequel, there's a bit of a, and I'm not a studio head, right? But it should be that, we do the sequels and that helps fund the originals. That should be my perspective. And it should always be about the storytelling coming first. And I know that Pixar, better or worse, sequel, prequels in the 2010s, but they're still original films. And there's audiences for those original films. And where they got it wrong during COVID, it wasn't just the day and date streaming. The original films were a little bit more daring, and I commend them for that, and we'll cover that on the series. But when they looked into the IP side of it, they didn't deliver. And they've then gone back, like Lightyear, for example. Oh, we don't want to do a Toy Story 5. What about a Buzz Lightyear film, which is the film Andy watched, and it's crap. I'm just going to say it. It was crap's unfair. It was just incredibly disappointing. And they pivoted to, well, Lightyear didn't work. What now? Toy Story 5. It's that. And now we're getting Coco 2 and we're getting Incredibles 3. But there are original films coming. And
all these things are driven just by money. I mean, the whole thing. It is things that have worked before, and that will push out. Get on the high horse, but it seems like it will push out more original films out of the way for these for sequels. I know Hoppers was supposed to be really good. Have not seen it, but perhaps
Hoppers was great. Next year, there's I don't know the right term for animation style. There's going to be a film about a cat, and it's going to be like paintbrush animation style. For Pixar, I was like, that's quite daring, and it's like, do your sequel, do your original. Do your sequel to the original. I don't mind that, as long as you aren't neglecting, because those original films and stories are what put the studio on the map in the first place. Whilst there was a Toy Story 2, there wasn't another sequel until Cars 2, 12 years later, where it's so driven. And
I suppose that's the time. That's the times we live in, that where that people, heads of studios, want to churn out things that people know and things that are familiar.
Yeah.
So that's why we're getting, we got Toy Story 4, Toy Story 5. And
this is it. Toy Story 4 didn't have a good story to tell. I mean, Toy Story 1 and 2, fine, right? Toys Come to Life, early days. Toy Story 3 was, what happens when you upgrade your toys? And to Toy Story 5's credit, what happens when technology comes off? There's a story there. But Toy Story 4 was literally just, right, what can we do to put these guys together? And I think Paul summed it up where he's like, it's a compilation of short films. It covers everything whilst doing nothing new. And I've kind of agreed with that, and I know that's coming up soon in a few episodes' time. And I still don't mind Toy Story 4. It's just not on a level of those other ones. And I think Aaron made a good point when we did Finding Dory, where he said, if Finding Dory only got made when Andrew Stanton came up with the concepts, it wasn't the studio. I'm sure they were asking him, but he was never pressured into a sequel. But had that been today, it would have been mandated that you will do the sequel now. It wouldn't have been, if you ever come up with an idea, you're welcome to tell the story. It would have been, go make a Finding 2. And they're the times we live in within the film industry, not exclusive to Disney or Pixar. It is all the studios, all of them, when they're not buying each other and creating monopolies left, right, and center. But I do want to talk about something controversial with this film, maybe two. The first is studio idiocy, but I need to put it here. Disney tried to copyright Dia de los Muertos, and I've not spoken Spanish in a very long time, so I butchered the pronunciation there. I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact Disney tried to trademark Day of the Dead, a renowned holiday within Mexico, because they were doing a film, of course, about it. It didn't go through, as you may think. Do you know what it reminds me of? I don't want to get into football too much. Didn't Cole Palmer try to copyright Cold Palmer as a name or something? Like, can't really copyright the name Cold when it's, you know, preceding you by thousands of years. And I have to say, it's pure idiocy from Disney. It's lunacy from Disney to try that. It sums up the concept of corporate greed. And I have seen that there's always ridiculous trademark cases that people see on the news. It isn't, I'm picking on Cole Palmer, but I'm definitely seen a few of the sport ones where it's like names have tried to be copyrighted, celebrations, stuff like that. It's outrageous. It didn't go through, thankfully, and Disney were criticized. And I believe they actually withdrew due to the negative backlash, which is always worth mentioning, that, you know, they can get something right eventually. But another controversy that stemmed with this film, and we've been very positive. This isn't us criticizing the film, by the way. This is more the studio, you know, behind the whole thing. Now, there was something that emerged several years after Coco came out, and I've got to be careful how I say this, and it's going to look like I'm reading a Wikipedia page because I kind of am, and I don't mind saying that. The character of Mama Coco was somewhat based on a real-life individual, Maria de la Salud Ramirez Caballero. Also known as the Salud family, I believe, for this. We're going to read out like a seven letter name for every time I talk about her, respectfully. Anyway, when they were doing research for making the film, as Pixar do, they send the animators to different regions to look for influences, environments. Up, for example, to bring it back up, they got sent to Venezuela, thankfully not 2025. They were sent there back then to take inspiration from the birds, the rocks, the environments where they could travel. Toy Story 3, they go to recycling facilities to research for that. And Nemo, they're sending animators into the sea to look at how fish move for animation. A very tried and tested Pixar method that has been really interesting to read about across the time of doing the series. And of course, for Coco, they would send their animators into Mexico for research purposes. And what emerged after the film came out was the real-life individual who I just mentioned. She was photographed by the team that took that. And Mama Coco essentially became a replica of her in the aspect of production, clearly looked at as a model. And the Salud family were renowned for this too. And where they lived became huge tourist attractions. But Pixar didn't acknowledge that. And there wasn't a court case. There wasn't a, you know, we're trying to get money out of this. It was more of the fact that I would just say it's exploitation of real people, which has gone on to in turn make a business, I would say at this point, maybe billions of profit. I mean, the film makes $600 million profit. I'm sure at this point with home media, merchandise, everything else, they're past $1 billion profit with Coco now. Just saying that as a very quick understatement. And with there being no recognition, with the producers not doing anything, even calling her Mama Coco without even taking the name from her. She did pass away in 2022, but it became it was a weird story because I remember when it came out that there was this stuff going on, and it was strange because, and I feel like I'm waffling, so jumping on, but because there wasn't a court case, because there wasn't a please give me money, please give me this, please give me that, it was just more of a fact that, hey, this is kind of what your film has done to this family in this area. Like, not them moaning about tourist traps, nothing like that, but it was just a very sort of uncomfortable, you've kind of, maybe exploit is the wrong word, but you have banked money without them having a pet. It's a bit like when you see on the news about these artists with Marvel, right? Where whilst everyone knows Stanley had all the credit and all the money and wealth that came from his role upon Marvel, those other artists at the time who got paid peanuts and retrospectively haven't earned anything from their stories and their writing and their art becoming billion-dollar franchises in their own right. It reminds me a bit of that, where some dickhead's going to defend the studio, be like, "Oh, but they didn't sign a contract that allowed that." But it's the principle for me, at least, of that. I jump in because I might have gone off on a tangent.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very hard one to sort of navigate, and I'm reticent to sort of go in depth to talk about it because of the sensitivity. But ostensibly, it should be, if you've used someone as inspiration for one of your characters, they should get credit for that inspiration, and that that's the black and white version of looking at it. Well, the only way of looking at it really is to credit people that inspire you, which is why books have acknowledgements at the beginning, because people give people other ideas, and they have to acknowledge that is something that's happened. So I think, and you just have to look at the similarities. I mean, the Mama Coco character is, I mean, it's looking at an animated portrait of this woman that obviously had no. It's a tough one to navigate, and I think that part of it should be readily called out.
Yeah,
but it doesn't. Yeah, and that's probably all I'll say, because it's touchy subject.
It's very personal to a family in that location as well, and it does make it easier. Right, it's hesitant to talk about because you don't want to spend too much time on it, because that not takes away from the film, but the family might have never wanted. They might have wanted privacy. Like, it's a relative.
Yeah, obviously we're not sort of lawyers or anything, so we only have our opinions to go on, and the things we say might be completely incorrect, and it's
tricky, but it leaves a sour taste. I'm gonna say the production side, not the real life, the production side of, to come out several years after the film did. The success of said film from the get-go was huge when it released, has remained within pop culture since, and as we now know, it's going to sequelize. It's a weird word to say out loud, and have more going with it. Even in the Pixar I mentioned, where there's a Mama Coco photo op, you see the real photos of her, and you're like, oh wow, like that. Yeah, as you said, it's an animated version of this individual, and they were rightfully called out too, which is probably a right way of saying that. And without awkwardly segueing away from that, because the next section is in the anime. I don't know where to put. It's really hard to write controversies because you have to segue. Maybe I should have put it with the Mama Coco bit, but
no, that's
yeah, the animation, right? So we're at this point with Pixar, right? They're the gold standard. People would disagree with me. I do think they have I don't want to say best animation, because animation can be so many different things, but the consistency of Pixar, 19 films into a series and heading into 2017, the standard of that animation is going to be above what the majority are capable of. Budget reasons, on top of legacy reasons, on top of software reasons. This film in particular, when doing a new environment, doing the Land of the Dead, having almost a skeletal cast for like 4/5 of the film, would you say, is probably involving. You've got like the opening with the human family, then obviously you've got Miguel throughout, but this feels like the most unique animation they've done since those early days, which sounds really, really rude. I'm not disrespecting Inside Out, because Inside Out's animation's superb and it's different emotions, but what has gone into creating the Land of the Dead, creating almost a new type of character, because it's not monsters, it's not toys, it's not fish, it's skeletons. It's a skeletal society. Never thought I'd say those words out loud either. And the animation is incredible, and God knows how much fun the animators themselves have had, but the amount of comedic moments they're able to throw in just by an animation joke of bones moving around, dropping the mouth off several times. It's got a really unique approach, and I think what makes it stand out is the fact there hasn't been anything like this before or after. And anyone that would try to do something like this now, it would just get compared to Coco, because it's almost I don't want to compare it to Harryhausen, because that's different. That's visual effects at a new level, but it feels that like who's done the most skeletons.
The thing I would say sort of on the visuals and how it holds up. So obviously the film is stunning. The film is breathtakingly good looking. I think that's got a lot to do with the vibrancy of its areas and the vibrancy of its locations. and you see a whole depth and range of color in the Land of the Dead, even in the town Miguel is from. There's real vibrancy there. People wearing colorful clothing, and just these cultural elements that are brought in. I think, if not to say that the other films are less vibrant, but this really sticks out. You really see sort of the detail and the colors in each frame, and it makes it all the more pleasurable to watch, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I think it goes a long way, and I think in turn of that, the story in hand that goes with it, which is the most important part of any film, is that story. And I think Day of the Dead's a really fascinating one, because I'll be totally honest, I'd heard of it before. I'm going to say before Spectre and Coco. It was one of those cultural events where you've probably heard it in passing and seen photos or clips online before, but you don't have an understanding. Without me sounding uncultured, there's not that understanding, particularly here in the UK, I'm going to say. Versus, it might be a bit different in North America, but certainly here in the UK would be more akin to, I don't want to say because they speak Spanish, but it would be more akin to European, like Spanish traditions that may come over here eventually, not necessarily Day of the Dead, which is very much with the Mexican culture. And I think to have an idea of what they want to do with that, but then to make music the core of that story, that you've got a really simple premise, and it is without getting into too much of family history, not necessarily mine, but the concept of the dad that walks out on the mother and the baby and doesn't return, and how that separates and scorns a family, and they make it their life going. Their music is banned for several generations of this family. His great is it Mama Coco is his great grandmother, which means that it's a great there's a lot of greats in there. I'm going to lose track, but that's not the point. The fact that you build up this history through the opening, through the scenes, they explain the importance of Day of the Dead, but to make it this point that Miguel is against the family side, he believes there's a musician in him, like it's in his blood. They are so opposed to that to the nth level that you'll be what could be the most possible opposite thing from being a musician. We're a family of shoemakers now. There's no music involved in this. There's nothing you can do. It's almost like a DNA thing. Like I was to go to Man of Steel for this, where like that codex thing, and they're like, yeah, your family line is this. This is like, you're born a shoemaker, you will be a shoemaker, and we know that there are generational. Farmers here in the UK is probably the most obvious example where generational things pass down. For Miguel, it's you'll be a shoemaker, no music for you, and I love that really simplistic idea. But to then have him turn his back on his own family to want to be a musician, to steal from the dead out of desperation that puts him onto this journey into going to Land of the Dead, I think it's one of the strongest stories. And that's a simplification of that story, because it's the characters and their relationships that, to me, make this film work. Because Miguel, he's not the nicest of kid. He's a kid protagonist still, but the characters he surrounds himself with on his adventure make this film for me. I don't know what your thoughts are on the overall story before we get into the characters.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the story itself is, you could boil it down to its sort of to simplicity, as you put it. I think what works obviously is the characters that Miguel meets along the way in his journey, but it is also ostensibly both parties. He turns his back on his family at the early on, but in a sort of wrongly, I think, and it's very much portrayed that both his family and him are partly in the wrong here, and that there is an even middle ground that eventually comes to fruition at the very end. Obviously, has a lot to do with memory, how you want to be remembered, and what happens when people don't remember you. What happens when the actually has quite an I'd say an anti-capitalist message layered in there somewhere. Obviously, the very top echelons of society are more well remembered than the bottom rung, and it's those people that deserve remembering more than the oligarchs at the top, like the Dela Cruzes, who obviously stole things off the back of others. I think that's plays really. That was one thing that I picked up on when sort of watching it for the second time, was that actually this is kind of an anti-capitalism, an anti-capitalist film, just sort of layered on, embedded within a sort of cultural story, and having these cultural identities within it. And that's a story that everyone resonates with, obviously, well, except for gammons on the internet that love billionaires, but it's a story that should resonate with everyone, and it does. Obviously, it's an emotional story. I mean, there are really a massive gut punches, and the ending is chef's kiss.
Jumping to the ending, what makes it remember me more powerful is they so intentionally hold off that song being played in full until the ending.
Yeah.
There's a moment where they're singing it in Spanish. There's a moment where they're sort of not teasing, but they're playing on an instrument for a couple of seconds here and there, and it has been built up as reputation. But the emotional crux of the film, where the film functions and lives and dies, is the final scene where it's played. And to get to that moment, having never played it, I think deserves real praise for that. And the characters too. I mean, we've got Miguel. I've not got too much to say, but not in a disrespectful term. He's a fine lead character. It is the childhood role, right? That you're looking for that lost relative, and I guess it plays that mindset, like, not don't meet your heroes, but imagine finding out your descendants like one of the most famous people ever, and having a positive representation of that famous person ever type thing. History remembers him fondly. What this film does that I think is the key for me is the relationship. I want to say the fathers. It's not the fathers, it's the great-great-grandfathers. But I love the Hector story. I love the Ernesto de la Cruz story.
Yeah.
That Hector is this trickster, this joker that you're going to spend all this time with. He just wants to get a photo because he just wants to get to. It didn't really make it clear until halfway through. This isn't me picking or being nitty-gritty. They very, very well right around the fact Mama Coco's his daughter until they need to say it, because I personally think this is one of the best Pixar twists, where you discover that De La Cruz is the fraud, that Hector is not just the writer of those songs, that is the relative, that it is him, it is not De La Cruz. And I think the film does and the first time I watched the film, I was like, oh wow, that's a really good twist. The second time I watched the whole film, like, oh, that's actually his relative. And I'm then looking at the great-great-grandmother, because they're in a few scenes before it's them, and she's sort of looking away from him. There's no comments, there's no nothing, and I think the film does a phenomenal job at building to the twists, executing said twists, and then developing the story after. Because I think a lot of films can forget to develop after they do make a big twist. They just want this moment. But when the film has written specifically leading up to, during, and after, I think that's when your real ones have that tremendous impact. And I love what they do with them. I mean, De La Cruz, I don't want to get into wrestling terms. He's basically Alberto Del Rio, but dead. Voiced by Benjamin Bratt, who I most know from Andor, where he played Bail Organa in season 2. Like many great Pixar villains, you always know there's something off about him, but you're going to find out what it is. Bit of a Lotso type, maybe, but when you realize that, he killed his friend, he took the lyrics that he had no intention of ever singing live, and he, like, as you said, it's anti-capitalist. He commercialized a song written for someone's daughter.
Yeah,
it's pure evil. And for Hector, he's a victim. His family have disowned him through memory, through something that wasn't his fault, when he's on his way home to them. And it is, it's unbelievable. It's probably why I was crying so much, at the family side of it, and the maturity of Miguel when he realizes that truth too. There's no sort of denial of, this can't be right, this isn't him. I love everything they do. I don't know, I feel like I'm just gloating about its greatness, but I don't have the right words.
I think my comparison is Dela Cruz reminds me of Elon Musk in
hopefully the way that, giant bell drops on him.
Yeah, in the way that he has no visible talent whatsoever. Yeah. Well, I think Dela Cruz can actually sing and play the guitar, which is a talent in of itself. But he has to piggyback off others to actually get his success. But strip all that away, no one probably actually really likes him.
It's like when he gave himself that cameo in Iron Man 2. It's like he thinks he's Robert. He thinks he's Tony Stark when he's not. Like, it is that, isn't it? Yeah. What did Donald Trump famously say without defending Trump? He was like, I could get Musk on his knees to beg in the Oval Office if I needed to. And he is that lapdog. But you're right, there is that comparison there. It's very interesting how that's developed across the
and also don't meet your heroes. So I mean,
yes,
it's also so a lot of films do this and do this really well. But the one film that comes to mind, especially when I watched it the second time, was actually one of my favorite films, is The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. So that is a film essentially about celebrity. This Robert Ford looks up to Jesse James in a way that is unhealthy and unnatural. But when he actually meets and gets integrated into his gang, that's when the legend doesn't quite live up to the person. And it's the same thing here. Obviously, for a kid's film, that was sort of a gritty Western. But it's the same sort of narrative, right? It's the same sort of thing. Don't look up to, don't ever meet your heroes because they will only ever disappoint you.
It's true. And I think in turn with Hector, without getting society as well, you have to look at, he's kind of the joke. There's no one there to remember him. He's fading. I don't want to say he's poor, but he'll be looked upon as a bit of a trap. No one's got his photo up. He's desperate. His tricks are trying to get over that. All he wants to do is see his daughter. He's got no intention of being remembered by anybody. He just wants to see his daughter one last time. And I think there's something truly powerful in that. And it's not just talking family. It's not me just getting deep and therapeutic on a stream. It's very real. And for a film that's the concept is the Day of the Dead and spending time in a fictional world of the dead, you're bringing in these real theme environments. And it does make you look at holidays such as this. It makes you look at other cultures and realize, like, what more could we look at? Not borrow in the context of stealing, like what the British do, but looking into that, like, what do we do to remember our like relatives who have passed on and stuff? And we had photos out for many years until 10 years ago of who my parents' grandparents or great grandparents were. Remarkably, one of them looked like Leonardo DiCaprio, which we'd always joke about. I didn't inherit those bloody genes. I wish I had. That'd be a very different video. But it was that, like, had no context of these people, but they were in our house and we were told about them. And I do think that's important. I think every culture is different, and it's amazing when you have a film that reflects and looks on them. And I just think the characters, particularly in Coco, add to that, because you could have this great visual world and characters and designs, animation, but if you've got a weak story, it'll still be memorable, but it won't have that connection that I think everybody has moved toward. And I'd be really curious with kids in a non-weird way, that, like, I wonder how they look at a film like this at a tender age of 7 or 8. If they think about, maybe they've had relatives pass on and they think about remembrance or other things. I just think it poses a lot of internal questions, which I don't really tend to get in film.
Well, it's a thing, right, where, as opposed to here in England, the culture is completely different, where, over in Latina culture, and obviously I can probably get this completely wrong, but hey ho, that you'll have different generations work in the same household. They'll look after their elderly relatives in a way that we don't. Realistically, when people get old, we stick them in care homes and don't look after them in the same house as us. We thrust that onto other people. Obviously, care sectors should be fantastic. But it is something to look at. It is inward, you watch it and inwardly look on things that you do. So I wouldn't be able to tell you what my great granddad looked like at all. I've rarely seen pictures of him, and that's it's shocking. It does make you look at things that you do and go, well, I definitely could do this better, and could do it like this. Have a monument dedicated to all the relatives that died over generations, and remember them that way. Not that's a very morbid discussion.
No, I get that. I kind of want to jump in without making a joke, but it's like what we tend to get over here is the commercialization of, do you want to know your family tree? Sign up for £4 a month and we'll trace your bloodline back. And I know people that do that stuff. I'm like, I don't want to say I want to get past a few generations. There's someone I worked with. I don't want to get to, you won't be watching, so it's fine. We were good friends, so I can make this, but her partner has generational wealth. For conversation's sake, for anyone that knows the UK, the family's based in Sandringham, which is obviously a sign of wealth. Anyway, she got bored one Christmas, so she started doing the family tree. She comes in with a revelation a few days later. Her partner's family wealth comes from slave trading. And
fucking hell.
Yep. He wasn't really bothered, and what, you can't really do anything for us in our generation, but not bark up the wrong tree. But it's like, well, you wanted to play that game of researching online for a bit of fun one night, and I think there's a difference between, again, it's the commercialization of it. You see these adverts here in the UK, like, go find out who you were related to or what this is, but there's more to it. And then you get shows like Long Lost Family, where it is a bit different, where it's more personal driven, which is more like this. And I know I've gone way off point, and this video has become a bit of therapy in a way.
I mean, that's the thing, though. I've got a grandparent that I don't. I've on my mum's side is quite a big, large side of the family, and my mum has 3 sisters, and their dad, or my granddad's 96. So, and it does make you think that if he were to go, the stories that he wouldn't be able to tell the stories that he would anymore. They just cease to exist. The memory of them would sort of go, and it's troubling that is a way to think
normalized in our culture. Like it's weird approach. I mean, not like I've got it wrong. I should have got someone from a Latino background, but I kind of wish there'd have been 3. But the culture, without getting into a whole Britain shit sort of thing, our culture here is not like, it's not family driven. I don't think what you mentioned about care homes, like there's absolutely a necessity for care homes. But then, like, I mean, we had a relative put in a care home 2 years ago, Hubert, to move up from London to where we live, because he didn't have the family down there to support, and he was trying to live by himself, which couldn't work. No one's obviously going to move down to London, and you had to, like, the price. I don't want to get too much, but the price was like £1.5 a week. Like, you're talking footballers' wages for a care home, and you had to show that you had finances to do this for 5 to 10 years. And he passed away sort of 4 months in. But it's like, I'd never known of, maybe because we're kids, we're educated, you think of like, you just go in a care home, like you'd go into a hotel or something, like you just sort of go there and you're helped. But it isn't that. And then I look at other cultures that are within Britain, particularly where I live, and they do all have their relatives move in as they get older. And it's very different. South Asian cultures are very different to British. So it's been really interesting learning from them. And not that I have those thoughts with my sister about my parents. No, not at all. But it's just like how Britain is different, and that's something what Coco does. It highlights those cultures, and that I certainly think the conversation of the film, there's a lot to be learned from this country.
Yeah. So to my, I mean, just sort of getting more personal than I probably intended it to. But my my granddad built it's lived in the same house for 50, 60, 70 years, built an extension on the side to house his father-in-law when he was ill.
Yeah.
Obviously, that is an outlier in what you would consider, or what people would do in Britain.
One friend did the same. It was like, oh my god, they got an extension to house someone. It's like, but it's actually an incredible thing.
Yeah, and obviously that's still used. It's now turned into a dining room, downstairs bathroom. But it's like that's the exception to the rule here. That's not the rule itself. Which and it's films like Coco that highlight this sort of weird way of working that we have over here.
Yeah, very. As you said, it's a capitalist culture. Not that capitalism isn't there elsewhere, but there's certainly stuff here in the UK, right, where they do dismiss those sort of family things for that. Me and you, we know each other. We know how to talk. We get into a whole conversation about the NHS being defunded and making issues elsewhere. But this film, it makes you think about that stuff, which I didn't think I'd be talking about that, but here we are. But let's talk, not to segue more awkwardly than after what we talked about earlier, but let's talk about the score a little bit. Michael Giacchino returns to Pixar again. I'm going to say something wild. Why don't people talk about this film when they look at some of his best work? Because he's one of the best composers working today. He has composed on everything. He is John Williams version 2. He's done Star Wars. He's done Jurassic. He's done his Marvel. He's done Pixar. He's done everything. He's done TV. He's done Lost. He's spawned a son who has already won an Emmy and has already worked on Star Wars and Marvel and more already. Like, he's a generationally musical talent. No one really talks about Coco. And I'm a bit not troubled by that, but when you think of Giacchino and Pixar, everyone goes to Up, and I understand why they go to Up. But I'm like, no one's talking about the Coco score, and the score's phenomenal. And he is animated as a skeleton in the film, which is one of my favorite little Easter eggs too.
I think it's because the songs are so good that the actual original score isn't as widely talked about. But the score is phenomenal. Those songs, I was actually listening to them today. So catchy.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, you're right. Because I don't want to tell this a different conversation, but this isn't me dismissing Giacchino's time, but it's like, you think you're right. What I said, the songs outlast the score, and the songs weren't written by Giacchino or composed or performed by. And then I'm thinking of Sinners, and it's like Ludwig Göransson made one blues album and then made a soundtrack at the same time, and it's like that's a different conversation, and it's not me. You're comparing two greats at that point in time, but it's kind of wild where we've sat on Sinners for a year now, and it's like, how the fuck did he do that? But he did that, and he won an Oscar for that. But no, you are right. The song, Remember Me, we spoke about the sequence in which it's used, the build-up to it at the moment. It's become the most famous song from said film, understandably so. And kind of where I'll go with that, actually, I'm not going to change schedule. The legacy of this film, I'm going to stick with song first. This film was nominated for 2 Oscars, Best Original Song, Best Animated Feature, obviously Best Original Song for Remember Me. It won both. We spoke recently about Pixar films where they've not been nominated. Oh, they've got one, a few others. But this got 2 nominations, 2 wins, and winning the animated category, Disney kind of owned for a substantial amount of time. And then they started becoming celebrated when Disney stopped. I don't think Disney won animated film in about 5-6 years now. I could be wrong, but I feel like I saw something like that recently. As in Disney being Disney Animated and Pixar. But very fairly wins both these awards for Coco. But the film was an astronomical success. It grossed $814 million off a $200 million budget. It, more interestingly, released in Mexico several weeks before America because they wanted it out around the time of Day of the Dead, which completely makes sense. And the craziest thing about Coco, if you want to talk about how much money there was in the film industry pre-COVID, it didn't even crack the top 10 highest grossing films of 2017. yet made
wow.
$815 million. Okay, it's $7 million off being in there. But you talk about bubbles bursting. Those pre-COVID figures were sort of vile, if I'm allowed to say so myself, in terms of the money that were going into these businesses. But I want to talk about China without doing a Donald Trump impression. This is something I found out today. This film didn't meet the criteria to release in China. China is very strict on westernized media cultures. But apparently the CCP was so touched by the film that even the Chinese allowed Coco to release in China. Really random, useless pub quiz fact of the day. But I just love the idea that the CCP watched it and they probably were all crying together and just thought, you know what, we'll let this one come. Not that, you could cause a riot in China by having Coco release. I understand many other films being banned over there for their, the politics and what they believe in. But I love how they made these special exception for Coco. I don't know what part of Coco they would have disliked anyway. But I just thought it's a great useless fact. Any thoughts on?
If I no thoughts. I mean, if we went to the pub together and did a pub quiz and a question on that came up, I would, it's lucky that you would be on my side. So I had no clue.
Oh, I didn't either. I was on the IMDb trivia and I was scrolling down. I was like, is that talking about the CCP? And I was like, oh, because I know obviously in the 2010s, for people that are unfamiliar, the film industry was desperate for China money. Obviously 2026 is different now. China's built their cinema infrastructure, but they were allowing Western films in under very, very, very strict pretenses. Normally, you had to have Chinese cast members or Chinese products or commercials or shooting there or being involved in their cultures. Obviously, Coco, none of that for the right reasons. Unlike you, Transformers 4, where you became an advert for Chinese equipment. But Michael Bay knew how to make money in China, which is exactly what he did. But different conversation. But it's been not a weird one to talk about, but I feel I've been a bit all over the place, very emotionally up and down. Not down in a bad way. As you said, Tom, this is a lot more personal than I thought it would be. I want to kind of get back, not necessarily on tracks, that's the wrong word, because that implies I haven't had a good time. I think I know what the answer is going to be, but we always do, before we round out our final thoughts, we always go over sort of favourite scene of the film. I'm not going to speak for you, but I'm going to assume we're both going to say "Remember Me."
Yes, I would also put the scene where they try and get the guitar, and they go to the sort of area that's a slum, ostensibly, and meet the character that is forgotten, and
yes.
that is very emotional. Where Miguel, another scene I really enjoy. Miguel running away from his relative, goes through the gate. She starts to sing. Says, I really love music. It's your great grandfather that walked out and made me lose my love of that of singing, my love of music. There's so many.
I love the first time he performs live with his great granddad. Purely because he doesn't know at that point in time Hector's the musician.
Yeah.
So actually there's a great family moment subconsciously until you see it on the second viewing. There's so, what you said, the sequence of the great grandmother that she enjoyed singing, but she almost had to take it away from herself due to that. Them in the cave being saved, I loved as well, where they're reflecting on their life. I think the film is just, even comedic moments, him getting the blessing to go back to Earth and goes and steals the guitar again and goes back in. It does the right amount of comedy. I don't want to call it comedy respectively, but it's when it brings in humor into what is a very deeply personal film.
Mm.
It uses the humor in a very, I think, creative way, not just with the animation of skeletons, but everything else. But there's very, very powerful sequences. And I think Miguel as a character, they didn't talk about him too much, where he gets to by the end of the film, where he's this arrogant child wanting the guitar, wanting to sing. The development that he goes through, where he realizes the importance of the family, of this. And in turn, the other family members seeing how important music is. And what I love, it's a really, really small moment right at the end of the film when you get the 1 year later. It isn't just Miguel that's a musician. His cousins and other relatives have all got a little instrument. Even if you're not seeing them playing it, they've all got instruments. And I really love the impact of that. And then it just makes me frustrated because they were doing a second one. And I get annoyed at stuff like that. Sorry to jump
Maybe it'd be about those two.
Any of the scenes that you want to talk about before we go into final thoughts?
No, I was actually going to say that the you talk about humor, and where I think recently I've seen, obviously emotional moments are undercut with jokes. Seems to be the marvel of the
Marvel, yeah.
Where emotional beats are undercut with jokes. It's very much the opposite. Jokes are uplifted with emotional moments. Those you have a laugh, and then oh wait, you've got this gut punch comes towards you. It's quite a good sort of juxtaposition that I found really works. I didn't actually think I laughed as much as I did the first time. Probably mainly because I saw most of the jokes coming on the second watch, but I still think it is a funny film and
it's those
good time.
It's those moments that the kids, like the 7-8-year-olds watching, will connect to the funny bits as well as the dramatic bits. And when they're older, like what we all went through with certain Pixar films, they're going to get older at 10 and 15 years and be like, oh, wow, like that film hit hard. And there's a reason they're going to love that as adults as they did as kids. And that kind of moves into those final thoughts that you kind of mentioned it earlier. I'm going to jump in somewhat. I think this is one of the best Pixar films. And while it's been 19 episodes to the series now, I think like 2-3 weeks ago, I was like, I'm pretty sure I've got a top 10 nailed down now. I'm pretty sure I won't watch anything that's going to jump into this top 10. And I've been proven wrong within a few weeks that I do believe this is one of Pixar's best films. And I do believe generationally people will watch this. This will be huge. It is huge already. But I think the quality of this, to deal with such a personal story from a culture, certainly, I'm going to say again from the British side of things, Mexican culture is not known within England. It's really leaving that at the door. We barely look at other cultures, let alone, not anywhere. You look at other cultures and people scream and cry. That's a different conversation. But to even learn more about what we've spoke about, me and you, within this video, like discussing how we think, don't use the word wrong, but how we don't look at the dead in the light that others celebrate the dead. It raises those questions. And the fact that an animated film is doing that is kind of wild, says in the statement, but taking away the politics, taking away the real life side of things we spoke about, as a film, as this functions, it's an excellent film. This is top tier Pixar. And it does fit within those all-timers that we've sort of spoke about. And whilst I really do not want a sequel, there is that sort of morbid curiosity of, okay, can you prove us wrong? Don't want to be proved wrong, not in an arrogant way, but it's such a beautiful film.
I mean, I said at the beginning that previously my favorite Pixar film was Inside Out. This, having watching this for the first time, knocked Inside Out off that top spot. I think this is the best Pixar film that they've made caveat everything with in my opinion. But yeah, this is the one that hit me the most. It's the one that I think is the most visually interesting. Not to say that others aren't, but it's the most vibrant. It's the best one to look at, in my opinion. And its emotional moments are really, really, really fucking good. And I can't gush about it enough. It is excellent. I love it.
Excellent. And listen, I'm glad I had you on for this, because I was curious when you did say Coco. I was like, okay, finally someone that didn't say Toy Story 2. Not to shit on any guests. Everyone's gone Toy Story 2. But we've had a lot of people request a lot of films, and I think that's why I love the hosting side of these series. Is I get the intrigue of, okay, I didn't have Tom down. I didn't have you down as a Coco fan. I know your knowledge of cinemas. I won't blow smoke because you're on the stream, but we spoke about it before and a few other things. But when Tom picked Coco, I'm like, okay, I'm curious at what there is to say about Coco this. And it's been the same for other guests when people have picked certain films, the meaning and the connotations, what it is, what it did for them, what is for them. I think it's really fascinating. And that's why I get a lot of fun out of running these series as a behind the scenes comment, because you do get different insight into people's lives or what they grew up with or what their interests are or what their intrigues are. And this has been one of the most unique videos. When we did Up, that was kind of me and Neil having therapy. Whereas this was like very like not therapy, but sort of family driven. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Couldn't Britain be a bit better about the dead?
Like, a lot more personal than you probably wanted this to end up. But you know,
listen, I said when I watched it, you know, the week my sister gave birth, it was probably the 1 week of my life watching it where it's the weirdest in terms of family retrospectively. Until there's generations of us, which I'll be long gone by that point. Will there be a photo of me? Probably not. Don't put me in a care room; it's too expensive. Just chuck me in a bath and be done with me. That's way off point. Right, I don't even know how I outro from that. The Pixar retrospective. People might be curious. How do you follow up Coco? Wow. The Incredibles 2 is our next video, followed by Toy Story 4. Followed by Onward. But all hope is not lost if you're looking to join us to complete the hat-trick of depressing videos. Not only did we talk about Coco today and Up previously, Soul is now made the list. We are 4 weeks away from Soul. That was one hell of a day to spend Christmas. I'm just going to leave that there as a prelude. What was more depressing, watching Wonder Woman 1984 or Soul on Christmas Day? Either way, I watched both that year. The joys of COVID. But that's what's coming up on the Pixar retrospective. We've got every Tuesday, we've got videos coming up. And before we know it, we'll be at Toy Story 5, which is kind of wild because this video is going up on the 31st of March. And the fact we're 19 weeks into this, it's flown by. It genuinely has. And there's still a long way to go. So, Tom, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Well, what are you up to at the moment?
Anytime.
Where can the people find you? Because I love what's going to follow.
Probably not on. Well, social media isn't as active as it once was, but I have started to. I've written one thing for Get Your Comic Con, which I'm very very proud of. Was very very pleased when I saw that pop up online. So Resident Evil Requiem review. So jumped to the chance to sort of get involved with Get Your Comic Con, and I'm going to start want to do more stuff, more written work with them. But it's time constraint, and finding the time to actually do it with a full-time job is difficult.
And you're moving. And I've enough relatives in the last few years to know how it doesn't just end when you move. It doesn't end a month after you moved. It's the months and months and months that will continue. So the best of luck, not just for the writing, but for that. Maybe we'll get you another Pixar. Maybe we'll get you on the top 10. I need to check the schedule to see what's going on there, because you might have sent me more. I might have forgotten. I'm not going to lie. It's been very busy. There's a lot going on. As I've been very distant from the channel recently. What's gone up on the channel? God, there's not been a new review for weeks. That's not a good advert. There was a trailer discussion on the Harry Potter HBO series. There's going to be a review this week. I can give you 2, 3. There's going to be a review for the Mario film that comes out tomorrow at the time of this video going up. I will review that on Wednesday night. The new Rob Pattinson film is out on Friday with Zendaya, which I'm hearing wild things about, which I'm very curious by the trailer. To see what happens there. And I can finally say next Monday there will be a spoiler-free review up for the 8 episodes of the Darth Maul animated series, which was confirmed for me today. So I've got a lot of things to watch this week alongside continuing these Pixar reviews. Tom, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Everyone watching at home, your support is appreciated. We're entering week 20 next week. We're entering the COVID era soon. And that's going to lead to plenty of discussions, I feel. So that is me rounding out. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care. I'll see you then.